All right, how we doing? So, I was having an exchange earlier with someone on Facebook, and it was around. I'm just going to read what they wrote and then riff off it because we had a bit of an exchange, and I wonder if I can kind of elucidate more of what I was getting at if I make a video. And plus, it's fun, and I want to get better at it. So there's that. All right, so her post goes, not getting what I want seems to be far more interesting than getting what I want. It seems like once we get what we want and having it is able to be automated, we start to take it for granted. We start to get bored with it. We start failing to see any novelty that may actually arise or be within it. When I imagine what I might create, what kind of life I would create if I were capable of having every pleasure, every desire, etc., I do see what Alan Watts points to. That would get boring as fuck really fast. So part of it is indeed the fact that I want to be surprised. I want to create and cultivate desires that may not get met. And then I can delight and derive great pleasure when they are met, in contrast to the dissatisfaction of when they aren't. And the lack of predictability of just when and where the actualization of the realization of the desires will be met versus when they won't. Bloody flies. And yet I do enjoy some semblance of my illusions of control, illusions of power. Interesting. So, what's going on here? Like, ultimately, and this is with much respects to the person I'm in dialogue with, because I think they're great and they explore things really sincerely and honestly, and we have, you are, someone who I enjoy having conversations with because it allows, there's open for challenge. Which isn't the case all the time. So I'm going to speak candidly as to how I think about all of this stuff and what makes the most sense to me. It's a massive cope. Like, the idea that you're enjoying not getting something in contrast to getting something because it pokes around at your illusions of control. Like, that way of framing reality, I mean, I know that because I've been there, and that's what is really very confusing when you're living there, because all of this idea kind of rests on the idea at some level that creating is a product at some level of your belief. Something inherent to you, that there's something going on that means you can, you're responsible for the life that you're creating, but not on the level of your skills and abilities, but rather there's just something else going on, right? So it's like, and I always bring it back to these kind of really concrete examples, like if you were to make a cup of tea, the fact that you can make a cup of tea, that you create a cup of tea, isn't satisfying in contrast to the times when, you realize you're trying to pour the water you're trying to pour the water in the kettle and you miss the kettle and you press the kettle on and it doesn't heat up, and instead of tea you make coffee, and it's just like, oh, well, this is a fucking shit show. Like, aren't I glad that the times I can make tea I get to enjoy a cup of tea, in contrast to the times when I can't, because sometimes it just completely doesn't go my way, right? If you put it in those terms, it would sound ludicrous what you're saying, and yet as we kind of go up the scale of complexity, we lose that clarity. And now it no longer feels like we're making a cup of tea. It feels like we're engaged in some grand cosmic theatre that we really have no control over, and that sometimes we get what we want and sometimes we don't. And isn't that a great thing? Because, at least that means we get to enjoy the times we don't. Now, this really misconstrues what the creative process is. What it gets right is that, do we have ultimate control? No, we don't. There are many things that we do not control. Do we know that we are going to be able to make even a cup of tea? No, we don't. An asteroid might hit our house, or the power goes out. We don't know. We suspect that, given what we know and our abilities and familiarity with the process, that we're probably going to be able to be successful. And that gives us a degree of confidence. And we enjoy cups of tea when we want cups of tea, Now, what else is going on here is thinking that our ability to create what we want is actually about the return on investment that it's going to give us, like the feelings that it's going to give us. It's like, if we get what we desire, we feel good. And if we don't get what we desire, we don't feel good. And isn't that great? Because diversity is, the spice of life, right? Variety is the spice of life, and yet it's this coupling of feeling states and satisfaction with the creative process of going after what we want, where we get in trouble. Because in life, as a human being, there are two things that seem very true. You have desire. There are things that you want. There are things that you want to create. There are things that you'd like to go after. There are experiences you'd like to have. You have desires. And the second thing is that you are also an emotional creature. And your emotions fluctuate. You have good days, you have bad days, you're satisfied, you're unsatisfied, you get frustrated, you're pleased, you're really thrilled about something, and then the novelty wears off, and then you're back to, feeling however you feel. Now, one of the ways that this is almost the norm. If we talk about orientations, most of the world exists in a problem-solving orientation, where things are seen as problems to be fixed. And as opposed to a creative orientation, where life is an opportunity for you to attempt to create what you want. And these are very different things. So from a problem-solving orientation, you look at desire as, this is kind of what some of the Eastern things do, at least some interpretations of them at least, of let's get rid of our desire, or control our desire, or suppress our desire. But even that in and of itself is a desire. Now, the other part of it is around emotions, right? Like, if I can have this, if I can create this for myself, then I'll feel happy. Like, it's the oldest, most kind of cliched thing in the book, right? Like, if I get this, then I'll be happy. If that happens, then I'll be happy. But these are two very different experiences. Our internal state and the external conditions are really not very tightly linked. They're certainly not inherently linked. Like, you can feel good in scenarios that aren't that great, and you can feel bad in scenarios that are really quite favorable on the outside. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a bunch of rich people that are really depressed, and you wouldn't have a bunch of poor people that, are getting by and, have good days. So, all of that aside, that there are levels of dignity that do have an impact on our well-being. So all of that being a given. But like, what does all of this tell us about the fact that we have desires, we have emotions, and we have an opportunity in life to go after what we want? And the success in creating what we want is linked to our capacity as a creative people, right? Well, firstly, it means completely get rid of the idea that creating is about making you feel a certain way. Now, in the conversation, we talked about values, aspirations, why do you want anything? Like, it is about you. It's your life. There are things that you want to do with it. Now, why do you want them? Because you want them. Now, wanting things, having desire is very different from a desire to be happy, right? Or a desire for your desires to produce a kind of an emotional experience for you that you want, right? Like, they're two different things. You can want to go skydiving and enjoy the thrill and exhilaration of that, as well as the fear of it and the anticipation and the adrenaline and, all of those sorts of things. But you also want to go skydiving. If someone just said, and this will probably happen, remove the experience of skydiving and I just like tap you on the forehead and you get to experience all of those things, like, there are things, like, would that be the deal? It's like I tap you on the forehead and you get to experience, you get the experience of having lived a life that you've never, that you didn't live. You just get the feelings, I don't know. So that could go off into all sorts of sort of philosophical ideas about this stuff, which is not the purpose here. This isn't about trying to figure stuff out. It's just about trying to see what appears to be the case quite self-evidently, at least. Like, we want to go after things for their own sake, and along the way we have experiences. Or let me put it like this, actually. I don't want to put that on everyone. We have the opportunity to go after things for their own sake, independent of how they make us feel, independent of what it's going to do for us. The fact that we want it is enough to say we want it, and so let's do it. I want a cup of tea. I want to try Lapsang Souchong because I've never tried it before. Turns out I don't like Lapsang Souchong. Wasn't very tasty. Still pleased that I did it because it was never about me having a delicious, it wasn't about I have to like it. It was about I want to try it, Two different things. The emotional experience and the way we kind of engage and interact with that experience is separate from the fact that we wanted to do it in and of its own, for its own sake. So where does that leave us? Your values and aspirations are not to do with your feelings. The things that you want to create can exist independent of how you think they'll make you feel, just because you realize they're things that you want to do. Because if life is not a problem and you're not trying to solve it, and therefore feeling unhappy isn't a problem and you're not trying to solve it by being happy, you just recognize that as a human being, you have good days and bad days. Even if you're doing things that you want to do. That's just part and parcel of being on planet Earth. That if you take all of that as a given, then what does that leave you with? It's kind of, it's a really interesting question. I mean, you really remove all of these ideas that you have about what the purpose is of being here. And it has nothing to do with feeling good. It has nothing to do with, because that there's nothing that you can actually do that will give you a sustained emotional experience. That's not how it works, And that even if that were the case, like even if you kind of pursue the enlightenment path or whatever, it's kind of like, okay, now so what? So what? What do you do now? Like, do you want to do anything else while you're here? You know, there's like this crazy, we don't know what this life is, you know, we really don't know what this life is. What we do know is it's a fucking beautiful planet. Like, it's unreal how gorgeous this place we happen to exist is, right? There are crazy sunsets, there's like all these different landscapes, it's just a vast fucking awe-striking experience to exist. And we don't get to exist for that long. And the question is like, what do you want to do with it? Now, if you know that you're going to feel how you're going to feel, and it really has very little to do with what you get up to, and you know that there's nothing to solve, that there's nothing to do here that you have to do. So you're free, you exist, you're free, you get an experience where you have the opportunity to create stuff. And you know that it's not going to make you feel a certain way in any significant way that lasts. Then it just becomes a question of, well, what do I want to create for its own sake? Right? And you remove all of this idea of, oh, it's good when it goes well and it's good when it doesn't go well, because that's in contrast to when it, you know, it's just like, none of that matters. That's all these kind of mind games of like playing life right and being grateful for the fucking confusion. But the fact is, there are lots of things that aren't confusing, like making a cup of tea. Once upon a time, it probably was. There's only a few elements involved in making a cup of tea. But the very first time you made your first cup of tea, you know, it probably felt a little bit confusing because it had always been made for you. You know, it was like, oh, do I put the milk in first, or do I put the tea bag in first? How long am I supposed to brew it? Am I doing it right? You know, and then you realize like, oh, you have full editorial control. You get to make cups of tea exactly how you like to make them. And if you're not that interested in tea, no problem. There's plenty of other drinks that you can make, right? So it's like you realize that it really is a planet where you can do whatever you want. And it's not about making you feel a certain way. It's not about getting it right. It's not about problem solving anything. You just have the opportunity to create what you want. So what does that mean about our actual ability to create stuff? Because this Alan Watts thing of, you know, oh, if, you know, imagine if you could just have everything you wanted at the sort of snap of a finger and everything went your way. Like, well, that's a thought experiment. It's not real. Because in reality, you suck. You probably suck at doing most of the things that you want to do. Because that's also how aspirations work. We want to do things. We have ideas about things that we'd like to create that exceed our current abilities. And so most of the creative process is frustrating. Robert Fritz has called it, you know, adventures in frustration. Like, it's frustrating. Creating stuff is frustrating. Having desires and not being able to create the outcomes that we want is frustrating. And it's not frustrating in contrast, it's just frustrating because we're learning stuff, we don't know stuff, we're like trying to get stuff right and we can't get the rhythm right, it's like frustrating. Computer programs, technology, I want to run an online business, God, I've got to learn all of this stuff, and social media, what a pain in the ass. Like, there's loads of stuff that's just frustrating. But we want the outcome. We have a picture of the life we want to be living. And even that's a bit complex because a life is made up of different elements. But we have a picture of one element that we'd like, you know, a thriving, functioning business that sort of sustains itself with good clients and the rest of it. You know, like whatever it is you're doing. You know, a life with jobs where we can take holidays and do those kind of things. Whatever it is, the fact is that the journey there is going to be difficult, but there's nothing other than our ability to learn the things that we kind of are required to learn in order to be able to produce those results. And going through that learning curve, that I lost my train of thought there. Overall, I'm like, what am I on about again? But, okay, well, let me kind of bring it back to kind of the central theme, which is you do not know if what you do not know if what you will create will make you feel any particular way. And hoping that it will almost certainly disappoint you. And anyone who has, watch any interview with any famous person and they all describe this, right? Like it's so self-evident from anyone who's achieved what they wanted to that it doesn't satisfy often what they thought it would. So that's a given. And that just leaves us with the question of, well, what do you want to create anything for then? Now, and that's a question really worth asking, because you are here and you do have the capacity and ability to go after things that you want and improve and develop and likely succeed. Well, it depends what you're going for, but I think a lot of the things that the common person that I'm chatting to wants, people are making those things happen all the time. Why would you be any different? So as a general thing, you can probably create the things that you want. It might take you a longer time than you expect. Seems to usually be the case. Most of everything that I've ever wanted to create takes a shit ton longer than I thought it would. But so what, right? Because it's not about how long it takes. It's not about what it says about me. It's not about how it makes me feel. It's not got any symbolism that I'm like achieving anything or like overcoming my incompetencies. I'm not becoming more of a spiritual person, more of a valiant contributor to the new earth. Whatever it is, all of that symbolic stuff, like it has nothing to do with that. At the end of the day, I'm making a cup of tea because I wanted to, or I've got some guests coming round and I want them to also enjoy a cup of tea. So it's like, what do we want to do? Independent of how it makes you feel, independent of how it makes you look, independent of all of those other things, just because they are your values and they are your aspirations and you have the opportunity to go after them. That's kind of like, it's radical. And if you've made it this far, shout outs to you. And really everything that I'm talking about is covered in the work of Robert Fritz and structural dynamics. It really is an incredibly elegant and confrontational way of understanding the human experience and the human capacity to create, and then the creative process and how it all works, and how little so many of the other things that we bring into our creative process, effectively like how we live our lives, really actually hold up when you really scrutinize them, and how little it leaves you with to work with, and yet how much freedom there is in realizing how little constraints you have. So I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.